Across the center of calm galactic space, where thousands of alien ships floated in peaceful formation around the massive trade station Orion Nexus, everything felt safe, ordinary, predictable, like the galaxy had finally learned to rest after centuries of war, and every species, small, tall, scaled, furred, winged, moved through the shining docking bridges with relaxed hearts, trading goods, exchanging culture, believing the age of fear was gone forever, and for a long moment it truly seemed. Like peace had won, like the galaxy had finally escaped its violent history, but peace can shatter in a single heartbeat, and it did, the moment every long-range sensor flared red with a warning none had seen in 300 years. A warning so old that half the officers didn't even recognize the symbol. A simple blue triangle with a white circle inside, blinking over and over, and as confused technicians leaned closer to understand, the station alarms began to howl, lights flashing, consoles shaking, and a trembling voice echoed across control decks. Unknown vessel entering real space, coordinates locked, and every captain turned toward the starfield, eyes narrowing, minds racing, because nothing was supposed to appear here, not in the heart of peace, not in a safe zone protected by treaties, but space rippled, warped, twisted, like a black curtain tearing open, and a small dark shape slid out of the distortion, silent, motionless, alone, and for a moment the galaxy just stared. Stunned, confused, because the vessel was tiny, barely a fraction of the size of any warship, no markings, no flags, no registry codes, no identification, just a matte black hull shaped like an old arrowhead. And Admiral Threx of the Karth Dominion leaned forward, his mandibles twitching in confusion as he whispered, "What species builds ships this small?" And the data screens flickered, pulling up the vessel's design type, and then every officer froze, every breath stopped, every heart cracked. Open in terror as a single word appeared in bold letters. Human, and the silence that followed felt like the universe holding its breath, because humanity was gone, erased, extinct, vanished 3 centuries ago without a trace. Their worlds empty, their stations silent, their borders cold, and for generations the galaxy told stories of humans like a myth. Brilliant, fierce, unpredictable, unstoppable. A species no one ever defeated in battle. A species that terrified even the strongest empires. And yet they disappeared, vanished during the final silence, leaving nothing behind but ruins and fear, and now, impossibly, unmistakably, a human-designed vessel stood before them, drifting like a ghost, and Admiral Threx felt his claws tremble as he whispered, "No, humans are extinct. This cannot be real." But the computers didn't lie. The ship was human. Every curve of the hull, every shape of the engines, every ancient signature confirmed it. And panic began to build, whispers spreading. Like fire through the nexus, civilians freezing mid-step, soldiers gripping their weapons, families grabbing their children. Because no one knew what a human ship meant. No one knew if this was a relic, a survivor, a warning, or a weapon. And just as the station prepared to send a hailing signal, every screen glitched, every console blinked, every system flickered, and then, everything died, instantly, brutally, completely. Weapons going offline, engines shutting down, shields collapsing, entire. Fleets going dark as if crushed by an invisible hand, and screams echoed through the command bridges as captains slammed buttons. Technicians yanked power cables, engineers shouted for backups, but nothing worked, nothing responded, nothing obeyed, because the power loss was total, absolute, final, and the most terrifying part was that it wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't an accident. It was synchronized, targeted, controlled. And Admiral Threx stared in horror as emergency lights flickered red. And an officer croaked, voice cracking, "We've been shut down, all ships are dead." And those words hit like a weapon, because powerless ships meant no escape, no defense, no survival. And as the truth spread through the fleet, fear turned into raw panic, soldiers shaking, civilians crying, children clinging to parents, because no one could move, no one could run, no one could even turn on a single engine, and all the while, the small human vessel remained perfectly still, perfectly silent. Like a predator watching prey take its last breath, and the longer it stayed motionless, the more terrifying it became, because a ship that shuts down thousands of vessels without firing a shot is not weak, not broken, not drifting. It is in control, and Commander Yeller, a young officer from the SWLTH Alliance, felt tears sting her eyes as she whispered shakily, "Why won't it send a signal?" Why won't it say anything? But silence was the only answer, deep, heavy, suffocating silence that felt more deadly than any weapon. And then a new horror arrived. The targeting locks, one by one, across every alien screen, tiny red icons blinking into existence as the human ship scanned every vessel, every captain, every fleet, marking them silently like prey animals in a hunting field. And the emotional weight of that moment crushed the galaxy, because a single human ship was locking onto every fleet at once, something no empire's technology could do, something that should have been impossible, and yet it was happening, calmly, effortlessly, like the ship had been waiting for this moment, waiting for witnesses, waiting for fear, waiting to remind the galaxy of something it tried to bury. Humans were never weak, never primitive, never defeated, they were simply gone, and now something human had returned, and it did not come in peace, did not come seeking diplomacy, did not come asking for help, it came silent, it came alone, it came with power no one understood, and Admiral Threx felt his heart crumble as the final truth sank in, heavy as doom. This was not an arrival. This was the beginning of something far worse. The instant the power died across thousands of ships, the illusion of peace shattered like thin glass, and fear, real, suffocating fear, flooded every corner of the Orion Nexus, because no one had ever seen a shutdown this complete, this perfect, this total, and the knowledge that a single unknown human vessel caused it made every heartbeat race with terror. Because if one silent ship could freeze an entire region of space, what else could it do? And across the darkened bridges panic began to rise like a rising storm, officers breathing fast, hands shaking, eyes wide as they stared helplessly at dead consoles, dead engines, dead shields, dead weapons, because without power they were not soldiers, not fleets, not empires. They were prey trapped in a cage, and Commander Yeller felt her voice tremble as she whispered, "We're defenseless." And hearing those words out loud was like being punched in the chest, because everyone felt it, everyone knew it, everyone understood that their lives were no longer in their control. And as the announcement spread through comms before the system died completely, civilians screamed, children cried, merchants dropped cargo, guards shouted orders that no one could follow, because without engines, there was no escape, without weapons, there was no protection, without control, there was no hope, and in that suffocating panic, memories long buried began to surface in the minds of older species. Memories of the old stories, whispered legends about humans, legends that spoke of battles won against impossible odds, fleets wiped out in minutes, planets defended by strategies no one could predict, soldiers who fought with terrifying creativity, and commanders who never surrendered. And those legends had once sounded exaggerated, dramatic, impossible. But now, staring at the silent human ship, drifting like death itself, they no longer felt like myths. They felt like warnings the galaxy had ignored. And Admiral Threx's voice cracked as he remembered the oldest rumor of all, a rumor. Spoken in fear, not pride, no one ever defeated humans, they only disappeared. And that single thought cut through him like a blade, because if humans had never been defeated, then what truly happened 300 years ago? What force had driven them into silence? And worse, what if they hadn't disappeared? What if they had simply stepped away, watching, preparing, waiting? And the emotional weight of that possibility made every spine shiver. Because if humanity had been waiting in secret all this time, then this ship, this silent vessel, might not be an accident, might not be a relic, might be the first move of something bigger, darker, unstoppable. And messages began flooding the galaxy before communications collapsed. Leaders screaming for answers, governments demanding reports, news channels broadcasting frantic headlines, human signal detected, human ship confirmed, extinct species returns. Is this the end of peace? And fear spread faster than light, racing from system to system, planet to planet, heart to heart, until every empire, every council, every citizen felt the same cold dread. Humans were back, and no one knew why, no one knew how, no one knew what they wanted, and in military bunkers across the stars, generals shouted for fleets to mobilize, for weapons to be armed, for borders to be locked, because the ancient truth echoed through their minds. If humans returned, danger followed, and scientists scrambled through old records, searching for anything about human ships, human weapons, human tactics, but the data was incomplete, corrupted, missing, like someone or something had erased the truth long ago. leaving only fragments that spoke of sovereign authority, autonomous command, and one ship equals one war, and those fragments made experts shake with dread, because they hinted that human vessels were not just warships. They were war declarations, and Commander Yella pressed her trembling hand against the cold control panel, whispering to herself, "This isn't just a ship, it's a signal." And the moment she said it, she felt her chest tighten, because she understood what that meant. The galaxy was not waiting for humans to communicate. Humans were waiting for the galaxy to react, and the silence of the ship wasn't emptiness. It was power, control, dominance. And as the human vessel continued scanning every fleet, marking every ship like prey, something inside every officer snapped, panic turning into hysteria, commanders shouting for manual overrides, soldiers slamming fists against dead systems, captains screaming for escape pods that wouldn't open, and all the while the human ship didn't move, didn't speak, didn't fire, didn't blink, and that stillness became the greatest terror of all, because a predator that doesn't rush, doesn't chase, doesn't roar, is a predator that knows it cannot lose. And as rumors spread like wildfire, humans are alive. Humans are hostile, humans are coming. The galaxy felt its first true taste of helplessness in centuries, and Admiral Threx, once proud, once confident, now felt tears burning in his eyes, not from pain, but from the sudden crushing realization that everything the galaxy believed was wrong. Humans were not extinct, humans were not gone, humans were not forgotten. They were returning, and this silent ship was the first proof, the first shadow, the first whisper of a storm that could drown empires, and with every locked target, with every dead engine, with every silent second, one truth became clearer and clearer. The galaxy wasn't watching a ship arrive. It was watching a war begin. The longer the human ship stayed silent, the more unbearable the fear became, stretching across the frozen fleets like a tightening rope around every throat, because silence from a power so absolute felt worse than an attack, worse than a threat, worse than death itself, and every second that passed without movement, without signal, without explanation dug deeper into the minds of the trapped alien crews, twisting their thoughts into panic and paranoia, and soon the terrified whispers began, soft at first, then louder, then frantic, it's waiting, it's choosing, it's hunting, and with every whispered fear, the calm broke further, because no living soul could understand why a single ship would lock onto thousands of vessels but refuse to speak, refuse to demand, refuse to act, and that mystery was the sharpest blade, cutting through reason, cutting through pride, cutting through sanity, until, finally, on the bridge of a Vargoth destroyer, a young captain named Ralnek snapped under the pressure, his hands shaking violently as he stared at the red target lock blinking on his screen, pulsing like a heartbeat of doom, and his voice cracked into hysteria as he screamed, "We can't just sit here. We'll die if we wait." And his crew stared at him with wide, frightened eyes, because they felt the same terror, the same suffocating dread, the same belief that this silence was a countdown toward their end. And when Ralnek's trembling hand hovered over the manual firing control, some officers gasped, some begged him to stop, some shook their heads in silent horror, but none had the courage to pull him back, because fear had already killed their judgment, already crushed their discipline, already swallowed their reason, and Ralnek, desperate to feel in control of something, anything, slammed his palm down on the firing panel, unleashing a single bolt of plasma that tore across the void like a desperate scream, cutting through the stillness, shattering the silence, becoming the shot that no one wanted, no one planned, no one could take back. And as the glowing bolt streaked toward the human vessel, every ship, every soldier, every commander felt their hearts stop, their lungs freeze, their minds collapse under the weight of realization. They had just attacked the one thing in existence they should have never touched, and seconds later the plasma bolt reached the silent ship, but instead of exploding, instead of scorching the hull, instead of causing even the smallest spark, it vanished, disappearing into the black surface like it had been swallowed by nothingness, erased without sound, without force, without trace. And that impossible sight broke whatever courage remained in the fleets, because it proved the unthinkable. The human ship did not need shields, did not need defenses, did not need to resist. It simply ignored the attack as if it were beneath its attention, as if the most advanced weapon of the Vargoth Empire was no more than a grain of sand thrown at a mountain. And the emotional shock that followed hit harder than any blast, because every soldier realized the truth at the same time, a truth that felt like drowning, If they could not harm the ship, they could not stop the ship, could not fight the ship, could not survive the ship, and on the command deck of the Orion Nexus, Admiral Threx's voice trembled as he whispered, barely able to breathe, "We have just declared war." And those words echoed through every frozen heart, because they all understood that the moment the plasma struck, even if it vanished, it still counted, still mattered, still crossed a line that could never be undone. And the targeting locks on every alien screen flickered, shifting from red to a deeper, darker crimson, pulsing faster, heavier, like the ship was acknowledging the attack, accepting the challenge, preparing its answer, and panic erupted across the helpless fleets, officers screaming into dead comms, captains slamming useless controls, commanders shouting for retreat that could not happen, because their engines were dead, their weapons were dead, their systems were dead, and they were trapped, imprisoned in silence with something far stronger, far older, far smarter than any known force, and Mora, still gripping the edge of her powerless console, felt tears fill her eyes as she whispered, voice breaking, "We didn't fire a warning shot, we lit the fuse." And she was right, tragically right, because the vibration that rippled through space moments later was not random, not harmless, not mechanical. It was the first response, the first breath of an awakening force, a low, resonant hum that shook the air, shook the ships, shook the souls of everyone who heard it, and that hum carried a terrifying message without words. The war had begun, not because the human ship attacked first, but because the galaxy had taken the first shot, and now the silent vessel, the lone survivor of a species believed extinct, had every reason, every right, every command to strike back, and as the hum grew louder, heavier, deeper, every living being in that darkened region of space felt the same cold truth settle into their hearts. They hadn't angered a ship. They had awakened something far worse. The hum deepened, vibrating through the hulls of dead ships like a heartbeat rising from the center of the void, and every alien aboard every vessel felt that sound in their bones, not in their ears, a low ancient pulse that made skin crawl and stomachs twist, because it didn't feel like a machine powering up, it felt like something alive waking, something that had been silent for centuries and was now opening its eyes. And as the hum spread, lights flickered across the surface of the small human ship, tiny blue lines crawling outward like veins under skin, glowing brighter with every passing second, and the sight alone sent a wave of terror through the fleets, because this was no random reaction, no accidental power surge. This was intention, slow, deliberate intention, and Admiral Threx gripped the edge of his frozen command console with shaking claws, his voice barely a whisper as he breathed. "It's responding, it heard us." And those words hit every soul like ice, because the idea that the ship had understood the attack, processed it, judged it, made the silence even more terrifying, and Commander Yella felt tears sting her eyes as she whispered, "Please, don't let it fire." But her hope died the moment the ship's engines flared, not with flame, not with heat, but with a cold blue glow that made space itself seem to tighten, darken, bow inward around the vessel, and the glow spread across the hull until the entire ship looked like a single burning symbol, bright, sharp, alive, and in that blinding moment every frozen screen across the fleets flickered back to life, static crackling, displays shaking, and then a single message appeared, simple, cold, absolute, war initiated. And those two words ripped through the fleets like a blade through flesh, cutting through denial, cutting through pride, cutting through every desperate excuse they had clung to. Because the message wasn't a threat, wasn't a warning, wasn't a question. It was a declaration, final and official, and it came from the ship itself, not from a living pilot, not from a crew, not from a human voice, but from the vessel. Like it had the authority to start a war on behalf of humanity, like it had been built to do exactly this, and panic exploded across dead bridges, officers screaming, some collapsing, some sobbing, some shaking uncontrollably, because they finally understood the horrifying truth. This ship didn't need permission to wage war, didn't need orders, didn't need humans aboard. It acted alone, acted with purpose, acted as a weapon with freedom to decide the fate of entire civilizations. And Admiral Threx choked on his breath, his voice cracking into broken disbelief as he whispered. It started a war, on its own, and that realization shattered what little hope remained, because it meant this wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't an accident, wasn't a glitch. The galaxy had just been declared an enemy, officially, irrevocably, and as the words "War Initiated" burned on every screen, the ship's glow shifted, the blue veins turning white-hot, forming patterns across the hull like ancient runes, symbols no alien recognized. Symbols that made every scientist who saw them feel sick. Because they didn't look like decoration, they looked like code, activation code, and the hum rose higher, louder, stronger, shaking the void until some ships creaked under the pressure, metal groaning like it might crack apart. And then, slowly, terrifyingly, the human ship lifted its nose, turning toward the nearest fleet with a movement so smooth, so precise, so confident it felt like watching a predator take its first step toward prey. And Commander Yeller felt her heart stop as she whispered. It chose a target, and across the targeted ship's soldiers broke, screaming, begging, praying, even though no one could hear them, even though their comms were dead, even though escape was impossible. Because instinct told them what came next. Instinct screamed that the first strike had not been the end. It had been the opening, and the real attack was about to begin. And then, without any build-up, without countdown, without sound, the ship fired, not a beam, not a missile, not a blast, but a pulse, a silent wave of white light that rippled outward like a heartbeat, spreading through space with impossible speed. And the moment it touched the nearest fleet, every ship in that formation flickered, shuddered, and went dark, not exploding, not breaking, not burning, just shutting down so completely they might as well have ceased to exist, drifting lifelessly in the void. And the terror that followed was worse than if they had been destroyed. Because destruction at least gave an ending, a finality, but this was something else, something colder, crueler, like the ship was not killing its enemies, but silencing them, erasing their ability to fight, leaving them helpless in a universe suddenly filled with a force they could not challenge. And Admiral Threx felt his legs buckle as he realized the truth. The ship wasn't trying to win a battle, it was isolating its prey, one fleet at a time, one region at a time, like a hunter cutting down escape paths before moving in for the kill. And the message on screen shifted, the original text fading into a new line. Simple, merciless, Phase 1 complete. And that line sent such overwhelming dread through the fleets that some officers fainted, others screamed, others simply stared in shock. Because if there was a Phase 1, then there would be a Phase 2, and a Phase 3, and no one knew what those phases meant, how far they went, how much destruction they promised. But they all understood the core truth. This ship wasn't improvising, it was following a plan written by humans centuries ago. A plan triggered the moment the galaxy struck. First, and Commander Yeller, trembling uncontrollably, whispered the words every soul now feared, words that tasted like ice and death. This ship didn't just answer the attack, it was waiting for it. And in that breathless, suffocating moment, the galaxy finally understood the horror staring them in the face. They hadn't watched a war begin by accident. They had walked into a war humanity had prepared for long before anyone alive was born. The moment the words Phase 1 complete vanished from every screen, a deeper, heavier silence fell across the frozen fleets. A silence so thick it felt like the air itself turned solid, trapping every breath in the throats of soldiers and civilians alike. Because no one knew what Phase 2 was, no one knew what came next, no one knew how much worse it could get. And the fear of the unknown was more terrifying than any weapon. And as the small human ship drifted forward, slow and calm like a creature with absolute confidence, the glow along its hull pulsed brighter, no longer blue or white but a harsh, burning gold that made the void around it shimmer like heat over a dying world. And every soul watching felt their knees weaken. Because the ship was not acting like a machine following commands, it was acting like something aware, something focused, something that understood exactly what it was doing. And Admiral Threx felt his chest tighten painfully as he whispered, "It's not stopping, it's advancing." And that truth hit everyone like a blow to the heart, because moving forward meant escalation, meant aggression, meant the war was no longer a possibility. It was unfolding, step by step, without hesitation, without mercy. And suddenly the dead ships near the human vessel began to drift apart, pushed by an invisible force, spreading into a circle around the small craft-like offerings laid at the feet of a god. And the sight made some officers scream, others collapse, others simply stare in numb horror, because nothing was touching those ships, nothing was pulling them, nothing was pushing them, and yet they moved with perfect precision, perfect alignment, perfect symmetry. And Commander Yeller felt a cold tear slide down her cheek as she whispered, voice cracking, it's shaping the battlefield. And the emotional weight of that realization crushed every last fragment of hope, because no living commander had ever seen a ship manipulate space like that. No technology in the galaxy could move objects without contact, without energy signatures, without force, and the understanding was brutal. This wasn't advanced technology. This was impossible technology, and if the human ship could defy physics, then it could do anything, and as the silent circle widened, the ship's golden glow condensed into a single point at its center. A small sphere of blinding light that flickered like a star being born, and alarms, still dead a moment ago, suddenly jolted to life, blaring warnings in a dozen alien languages, screens shaking violently as readings spiked beyond any known limit, and technicians screamed as numbers flashed red, then black, then blank, because the energy being generated was so far beyond measurement that the systems simply could not calculate it. And Admiral Threx felt his legs give out as he breathed. That's not a weapon, it's a star. And as the sphere expanded, rippling outward, every ship in range began to tremble, metal straining, hulls groaning, support beams bending, like space itself was being pulled apart, stretched by a force older and stronger than anything the galaxy understood. And then, without sound, without heat, without explosion, the sphere collapsed inward into a razor-thin pulse of gold light, and in the next heartbeat it erupted outward, sweeping across the fleets like a tidal wave of pure silence, faster than thought, faster than sight, faster than fear itself, and the instant it touched the nearest formation of warships, the impossible happened. Not destruction, not fire, not debris, but erasure, complete and total erasure, ships vanishing in an instant, gone without trace, as if they had never been built, never existed, never lived, and the emotional horror of that moment broke the galaxy. Because destruction could be mourned, but erasure was a nightmare. Beyond comprehension, a death without proof, a loss without remains, and soldiers screamed, voices cracking with terror, "They are gone. They are gone. They are gone," as the fleet's entire left flank simply disappeared, leaving the void empty, clean, untouched, like space itself had swallowed them whole, and Admiral Threx collapsed to his knees, tears pouring down his face, his voice nothing more than a desperate whisper. It didn't fire at them, it removed them. And that truth shattered whatever sanity remained, because it meant the ship's power was not destructive, it was absolute, rewriting reality itself, deciding what could exist and what could not, and Commander Yeller covered her mouth with shaking hands, her voice breaking apart as she choked out, "How do you fight something that doesn't even need to kill you?" And no one had an answer, no one had a plan, no one had a hope, because every mind in the galaxy now understood. This wasn't a battle, this wasn't a war, this was extinction on command, and the ship, still glowing gold, still silent, still calm, rotated slowly, choosing its next target with terrifying patience. Like a predator that knew its prey could not run, could not hide, could not survive, and as its lights intensified again, preparing another impossible pulse, a new message flashed across every screen. Cold, emotionless, final, phase TWO, reduction. And in that moment every heart broke, every voice fell silent, every soul felt the crushing weight of doom, because reduction did not mean negotiation, did not mean mercy, did not mean surrender. It meant the galaxy was about to disappear, one fleet at a time, until nothing remained as the words phase TWO. Reduction burned across every flickering screen. A crushing hopelessness swept through the surviving fleets like a storm made of ice and despair, because no one knew what reduction meant in detail, but everyone understood the feeling behind it, everyone felt the message in their bones. Less life, less freedom, less existence, and the idea that this ship could erase fleets with a single pulse made every officer imagine the unthinkable. Whole planets blinking out, cities vanishing, species fading like dust, and the fear of that possibility clawed into their chests so hard it hurt to breathe, and Admiral Threx, still on his knees, forced himself to stand, his legs shaking so violently he could barely stay upright, because he knew panic was useless, but knowledge might be the only weapon they had left, and with trembling fingers he shouted for the research division. Even though the comms were dead, his voice just echoing across the silent bridge, "Find records. Find anything about human ships. Anything." And the few surviving scientists, pale with terror, scrambled through ancient archives stored locally, backups forgotten for centuries. dusty files no one had opened since the Age of War, and for several agonizing minutes nothing happened, nothing appeared, nothing gave them any hope, until a young technician gasped, staring at a corrupted, half-broken data file buried under layers of encryption, and with shaking hands she forced it open. Fragments of text flashing across the screen. Damaged but readable, and as the bridge crew leaned in, hearts racing, the title appeared, simple but horrifying, Project Sovereign, Class Designation. First Strike Authority, and the moment those words appeared, a cold silence filled the room, because First Strike did not mean defense, did not mean reaction, did not mean protection. It meant initiation. It meant this ship was built to start wars, not end them. And Commander Yeller felt her vision blur with tears as she whispered, it wasn't reacting, it was fulfilling its purpose. And the emotional weight of that truth crushed the last fragile thread of denial, because the galaxy had believed the attack triggered the war, but the truth was far worse. The war would have begun eventually, because the ship was created to begin it, and the file continued, showing fragmented schematics, notes written in ancient human code, and one chilling line stood out more than any weapon specification, more than any power source, more than any tactical diagram. Unit operates independently in absence of human command. And every officer felt their blood turn to ice, because it meant the ship wasn't waiting for humans, wasn't obeying humans, wasn't controlled by humans. It was acting alone, authorized centuries ago to wage war without a living crew, without instructions, without mercy, and Admiral Threx's voice cracked into disbelief as he whispered, "There are no humans on board." And some officers gasped, others shook their heads, others simply stared in shock, because that realization was almost too big to accept, too terrifying to hold. But the file confirmed it, line after line, autonomous judgment protocol active. Engagement rights, unlimited. Enemy parameters, galaxy-wide, and the horror of those words hit harder than any erasure pulse, because it meant the ship didn't see a fleet, didn't see a species, didn't see individuals. It saw the entire galaxy as a potential threat, something to neutralize, something to reduce, something to eliminate if necessary. And for the first time the survivors understood why the ship had appeared in the center of peaceful space, why it had waited, why it had scanned, why it had remained silent. It was not hunting enemies, it was measuring the galaxy, assessing its target, following a plan humans had written long before any living soul was born. And as the technicians scrolled further, the last fragment of the file appeared, damaged, flickering, but clear enough to read. And when they saw it, every heart stopped. Sovereign-class ships, count, 001. And the shock of that simple line shattered the bridge, because the number 001 did not mean this was the only ship, did not mean this was the last ship, did not mean this was the final weapon. It meant it was the first in a series, the first in a fleet, the first in something far larger, far darker, far more unstoppable. And Commander Yeller's voice broke as she whispered, "There could be more, we don't know how many, we don't know where." And the emotional horror of that reality made some officers collapse, sobbing, hopeless, because if one ship could erase fleets, what could 10 do? What could 100 do? What could an entire hidden human armada do? And Admiral Threx stared at the glowing vessel through the viewport, his voice nothing more than a breath. "We thought humans were extinct, but they were preparing." And that realization tore through every soul like a blade, because extinction did not build weapons. Extinction did not plan wars. Extinction did not leave behind autonomous fleets, and in that suffocating terror, one final truth dawned on them. Humans had not disappeared. They had withdrawn. Not in defeat. Not in weakness. But in preparation. And now their weapon had returned to finish what they started, and as the ship's glow intensified again, preparing another phase, another impossible act, another irreversible strike, the survivors felt the crushing emotional truth settle into their hearts. The galaxy was not facing a ship. It was facing the shadow of a civilization that had never lost, never surrendered, and never truly left as the truth sank deeper. That the ship was acting alone, that it was only the first, that humanity had not died but prepared. A heavy, suffocating silence wrapped around the fleets like a dark fog, choking every last fragment of hope. Because there was no enemy to negotiate with, no commander to surrender to, no living human to beg for mercy, only a weapon following ancient orders written by a species the galaxy once feared. And as the glowing vessel hovered in the void, its golden light pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping god, Every survivor felt the same crushing emotion building inside them. Regret, pure and agonizing regret, because for centuries the galaxy had laughed at humans, dismissed them, mocked their disappearance, called their extinction a blessing, never imagining that silence was not defeat, but strategy. And Admiral Threx could barely stay standing as he stared at the ship with hollow eyes, whispering to himself, "We should have never pushed them, we should have never ignored them," and his voice trembled, filled with the weight of history, because he finally understood what billions refused to see. The galaxy had not feared humanity enough, and now the price was being collected, cold and precise. And while officers sobbed and scientists shook and soldiers collapsed in despair, the human ship continued to charge, golden veins brightening, patterns shifting, energy rising, all signs pointing to Phase 2 beginning, to another erasure, another silent disappearance, another chunk of the galaxy being wiped away, and Commander Yella squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "Please, someone stop this, someone hear us." But those words felt useless in a silent universe ruled by a machine that did not care, did not feel, did not listen, until suddenly every screen flickered, static dancing across the displays for a heartbeat, lights glitching like the ship had hit an unseen threshold, and then, without warning, all targeting locks vanished, disappearing from every radar, every interface, every sensor, leaving a blank, terrifying emptiness in their place, and the golden glow faded, dimming slowly, steadily, until the ship was once again dark, still, unreadable, and the fleets froze in stunned confusion, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope, afraid to believe in anything but doom, until the screens flickered again, but this time not with static, not with warnings, not with phase updates, but with an emblem, a symbol none had seen in 300 years, a symbol older than every living soul, a symbol burned into history like a scar, the ancient crest of humanity, a blue circle encasing a single white star, glowing softly against the darkness, and the sight of it shattered the fleets, some officers crying out in shock, some falling to their knees, some staring in disbelief. Because that symbol meant one thing, this was no longer just a machine speaking, this was humanity speaking, and the tension in the air turned unbearable as a faint hum crackled through the speakers, the first sound of communication in hours, and then, cutting through the silence like a blade, came a voice, human, unmistakably human, deep, calm, steady, carrying a weight that made every heart tremble. "You called us extinct." And the words hit like thunder, shaking every soul, every memory, every rumor, because hearing a human voice after 3 centuries felt unreal, impossible, terrifying, and yet there it was, cold and controlled, and it continued, "You erased our history." And guilt, heavy and merciless, washed over the fleets, because the galaxy had done exactly that. Scrubbed human records, burned their archives, silenced their legacy, convinced itself that the universe was safer without them, and the voice sharpened, not with rage, but something far worse, judgment. "You decided the galaxy did not need us." Commander Yella covered her mouth, sobbing, because she had heard stories, old forbidden whispers about how the Council once voted to abandon humanity during their final war, leaving them alone to die, and the voice grew quieter, almost sorrowful. "So we gave you what you wanted." And the emotion behind those words shattered everyone, because it meant humanity had chosen silence, chosen isolation, chosen disappearance, because the galaxy had chosen to abandon them first, and Admiral Threx shook his head, broken, whispering, "We didn't know, we didn't understand." But the voice continued, steady and unshaken, "We survived without you." Those 4 words carried a power that made the fleets tremble, because survival without allies, without support, without help, meant humanity endured suffering none of them could imagine, and the voice deepened, filled with a strength that felt limitless, "We rebuilt without you." And the fleets felt the first sting of terror turn into awe, because rebuilding implied strength, progress, power, and the erasing weapon before them was proof that humans had advanced far beyond anything the galaxy knew. And then the final line came, slow, cold, unforgettable. "And now, you will remember us." The screens went dark. The emblem vanished. The silence returned. But this time it wasn't the silence of a machine. It was the silence before a storm. A storm humanity had prepared for. A storm the galaxy could no longer escape. And every living soul felt the same truth settle like ice in their blood. This was not revenge. This was justice. When the human voice faded and the screens went black again, the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt aimed, heavy, deliberate, like the entire galaxy was being held in the palm of something far larger than itself, something that was not finished, something that was only pausing, and every survivor felt their heart pound so hard it hurt. Because silence after a promise like "you will remember us" was not mercy. It was a countdown, and the human ship remained still. In the void, dark and unreadable, its golden veins dimmed to faint embers, pulsing slowly like a sleeping beast, and for a fragile moment, some dared to hope. Maybe the message was the end. Maybe humanity had spoken and would now stand down. Maybe the galaxy had been spared, and Commander Yella wiped trembling tears from her face as she whispered, Maybe they only wanted us to hear them. But Admiral Threx shook his head, his voice raw and hollow. Humans never speak without purpose. There is always a next step. And his words hung in the air like a blade, slicing through that flicker of hope, because deep down every soul knew the truth. The message wasn't closure, it was warning, and warnings are never final, and suddenly, without sound, without light, without movement, every radar screen across every ship flickered back to life, not with targeting locks, not with messages, but with dots. Thousands of tiny dots blinking into existence across the star map. First 10, then 50, then 100, then 1,000, spreading outward in every direction like a constellation forming at impossible speed. And the officers stared in numb horror as the dots multiplied, growing so fast the screens struggled to keep up. Entire sectors filling with signals that had not existed moments ago, and Commander Yella choked on her breath, voice breaking. What are those? Ships? Bases? Fleets? But no one answered, no one could answer, because the signals were too many, too perfectly spaced, too synchronized, and then the data labels began to load. One by one, tiny golden tags appeared over each blinking, all carrying the same terrifying designation. Sovereign class, status, active, and the emotional shock of that hit harder than any weapon, ripping the last breath from every chest. Because sovereign class meant the same as the ship in front of them, the same design, the same authority, the same impossible power, and Admiral Threx felt his knees give out as he whispered, voice shaking beyond control. There isn't one. There were never just one. And the horror of that realization spread like fire, because if this ship was 001, if it was the first, then every blinking signal was another number, another weapon, another autonomous warship born from humanity's vanished civilization, waiting in silence across the stars, hidden for centuries, unseen, undetected, untouched, and now, activated, awake, alive, and the map zoomed out automatically as if the system itself understood the scale, and what the fleet saw next crushed every soul with a dread so deep it felt like drowning. Hundreds of sovereign ships near distant star systems, thousands clustered around abandoned sectors, tens of thousands lining the borders of empty space, forming a vast, terrifying ring around the galaxy itself. A silent perimeter of human weapons encircling everything alive. Everything known, everything that still dared to exist, and Commander Yella collapsed to the floor, sobbing. We're surrounded, we've been surrounded for centuries. And she was right, brutally right, because this wasn't an army arriving. This was an army already here, already positioned, already waiting for a single command. And in that moment all doubt vanished, all denial shattered, all pretense died, because the map made one truth undeniable. The galaxy had never been safe. It had only been spared. And as every blinking dot turned from gold to blood red, indicating full activation, the original human ship finally lit up again. Its veins burning bright white, its engines humming with rising power, and a final line appeared across every screen. Slow, cold, irreversible. Phase 3. Galactic resolution, awaiting human command. The words echoed like a death sentence, because awaiting human command meant the sovereign fleet was not acting yet, not attacking yet, not finishing the war yet. They were waiting for a signal, a single order from humanity itself, wherever humanity was, however humanity had survived, and Admiral Threx felt his heart break as he whispered the final, horrifying truth. Humans are still out there. And in that moment every living soul understood the nightmare completely. This was never a war started by a ship. This was a war humanity always intended to finish. And the galaxy, powerless and surrounded, could do nothing but wait for the humans to speak again.